A lot of NFL news out there. Of course, it always seems to get out there every single day. The leaks are real, but the news is fake. Is that the case about the NFL news we got here, Johnny Mac?
Some of the news leaked is fake and some is real.
Where would the NFL guys be without the leaks? The leaks are real, but the news is fake. All right, let's start with some of the leaks, okay? Let's see what's out there. I want to get your opinion.
And I thought you were going to go with the leaks are real and they're spectacular.
Well, I wouldn't have been surprised if the person who said that as well. But how about this stuff from Brady saying he wants to play into his mid-40s? And I love his quote, John. I've seen it all. There's nothing you could surprise me with. You know, I'm one step ahead of everybody. Do you see Brady playing 45, 46, 47 years old?
No, I don't. And that's but that's the only thing that's going to beat him. He's right as far as he's seen it all. He's done it all. You can't fool him from a defensive coordinator's perspective. But I always say, look at Peyton Manning. He was the MVP of this league. He threw over 50 touchdown passes. He was piloting the first offense, the only offense to score over 600 points. 2 years later, he was physically shot. So it happens quickly, and it'll happen quickly for Tom Brady when it does. However, it hasn't started. So I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen before he's 45. He's a heck of a lot closer to the finish line than starting gun. It might be hard to believe certainly for the New York Jets and the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins, but at some point, Father Time's going to get him. Nobody else is, that's for sure. But, you know, the amazing thing about Tom Brady is the competitiveness, the fact that he wants to play
that he wants to play at 45, 46.
Yeah, because let's face it, the guy's made hundreds of millions of dollars. His wife makes more than he does. He doesn't need it from a financial perspective. He's checked every box as far as legacy, as far as being the most successful quarterback of all time. There's nothing fueling him except competitiveness.
Yeah, and for him, now, if he made it that far, 45, 46 years old, I mean, that would be, especially in today's day and age, you know, right? I mean, like George Bland is a different story. You're playing today at 45, 46. That's a different story.
Yeah, I mean, there's 21-year-old guys who are 6'6" and 280 pounds running 4.5 40s chasing you. And they want to hurt you. Not necessarily on purpose, but, I mean, it's a physical game. And generally, it's a young man's game. So to even imagine him playing at this level at 39 is astonishing. Forget about it.
Yeah, unbelievable.
45.
The fact that he and to some extent, I thought you better brought up a great point about Manning, that one year he threw 50-plus touchdowns, and then the next year he's off the map. Brady, other than the knee injury the 1 year, he has had remarkable health.
Yeah, and that's part of it in the NFL. You can call it whatever you want, but whether it's injury prone, we talked a lot about Sam Bradford when he was here, and I mentioned it with Jimmy Garoppolo when we talked about what people are willing to give up. Being on the field's a big part of being a starting quarterback in this league. And having durability.
Eli.
Peyton Manning had it for so long. Eli has it. Tom has it. Very few have it. And as I said, Jimmy Garoppolo got his chance, was supposed to be out there for 4 games. He didn't last 6 quarters. It's a violent sport. And that's one thing Eagles fans should be very, very happy with, is the fact that Carson Wentz went through 16 games of an NFL schedule, got beat up at times, but he was out there every week. And that's really difficult to do in this league.
Talking with John McMullen here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN on NFL News and Notes.
John, you mentioned Jimmy Garoppolo. ESPN's Ed Werder does not expect the Patriots to trade Jimmy Garoppolo. Do you?
Yeah, I do. because I think they're going to be bowled over. I don't think necessarily, they don't need to trade him because he's still under his rookie contract. As a second-round pick, he's got a nice salary cap number for a backup quarterback, as opposed to somebody like Chase Daniels who's going to make $8 million. It's very cost-effective. But if somebody offers you the 12th pick in the draft or more for Jimmy Garoppolo, yeah, I mean, they're going to trade him. And they have a good third-string quarterback. So it's almost to the point of, do they want to? Not necessarily. But if somebody's going to offer that, you have to take it.
Jacoby Brissett, that third-string quarterback you're talking about, John McMullen with. So staying with quarterbacks here, we're also reporting that Tony Romo expects to be cut. He expects to be released. Do you see him being cut, or can Dallas still trade him?
No, he's going to be released, and that's kind of like, nothing against Ed, but that's kind of like no duh reporting. Nobody's going to trade for Romo under his current contract. Everybody understood that. The talk from
and by the way, he's 37. Just to throw to put in context of age between him and where Brady is.
Yeah, and the injury have started to pile up on Tony Romo. But yeah, nobody's trading the Cowboys even a conditional seventh-round pick for that contract. They'll just wait for him to release him. They have to. You can't play a backup quarterback that money, and they'll work out their own deal if you have interest in Tony Romo. The part, and that's where Jerry Jones and Tony Romo have a very good relationship, and they'll probably work out sort of a wink-wink deal that he's not going to sign with. Probably it only comes down to Washington, because the Giants wouldn't be interested. The Eagles certainly wouldn't be interested. And truth be told, I don't even think the Redskins would have any interest. So I think it's overblown to a degree. And at some point, the Cowboys will release him. And, yeah, I mean, Tony will then figure out where he's going to play next.
And since we're going through quarterbacks, we've talked about Tom Brady and we've talked about Tony Romo. Steelers with a little bit of news today about Ben Roethlisberger, is they don't expect him to retire, but they do say there needs to be a plan, right, John?
Well, sure, there's always got to be a plan, and Pittsburgh's one of those teams. Arizona is another one, after Carson Palmer indicated he's coming back for another year. But these are quarterbacks that have started thinking about the R word, retirement, and that means you better get on it, because very rarely does it happen seamlessly as far as a sort of a Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers type setup. Usually when you have a Hall of Fame level quarterback like Ben Roethlisberger, it gets really, really sticky after that. And to me, they're going to extend Landry Jones as a backup, but he doesn't strike me as a starter in this league. So, yeah, the Steelers got to start thinking about life after Ben Roethlisberger, and it's better to be proactive than reactive.
Yeah, that was my follow-up. Is Landry Jones the short-term answer, but not the long-term answer? Is that you're thinking about him?
Yeah, I mean, he's fine as a backup, and I think they like what he did, but I don't think they look at him and say he's going to be the guy if Ben say retires after next season. I don't think they would be very, very comfortable with Landry Jones as a starter.
Talking with John McMullen here, 97.3 ESPN, our NFL news and notes. Of course, big, I don't want to say big news, but a big name released by the Dolphins today, Mario Williams. And here's a guy who was a number one overall pick, has been in Houston, Buffalo, Miami. He had 1.5 sacks in one season. It was a healthy scratch. They save $8.5 million. What's the open market going to look like for Mario Williams? Do you see him as a guy who is at the end of the line here as the former number one overall pick? I mean, Reggie Bush was supposed to be the guy in that draft. He's about at the end of the line.
Yeah, it's up to Mario. If he wants to play, he could certainly play, and there'd be teams willing to use him and probably use him a little bit better where he could be more effective. But he's certainly not going to make the money he's used to. So it's really up to him. Does he just want to play football? He could certainly get a one-year deal with a veteran guarantee. I don't think there's any question of that. The days of him being a star player with the big contracts and that, yeah, that's over. So anytime you deal with a guy who, as you mentioned, is a former number one overall pick and has made a heck of a lot of money, sometimes they just say, they'd like to play, but they're not going to play for what they can. And you kind of saw that with DeBrickashaw. Ferguson wasn't a number one overall pick, but he was a high draft choice. He retired, walked away from the game. He would have played if the Jets were willing to pay him what his contract called for. But when they asked him to take a pay cut, he said, no, I'm done. So really, it comes down to, does Mario want to play football or not? Because he's not getting a big money deal.
And there's been questions about that in the past, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's, as far as being he was a very impactful player. I think people look at him as, I wouldn't say a bust, but they look at him as a former number one overall pick, and they say, why aren't you Bruce Smith or Reggie White or somebody of that? But he had a lot of good years in this league and was a very, very good player. It's just, obviously what we talked about with Tom Brady. He's not nearly the same physically, and that's just the nature of this sport.
So we'll keep an eye on that. Another news from Miami: the Dolphins were busy today. Another, pretty big name released for them, and that's Brandon Albert, the tackle down there. And I guess that opens the door for Laramie Tunsil, who was, much maligned on draft night. He was the guy, for people out there who don't remember. He had the mask and the bong, and then he just fell down the draft board. It looks like he impressed them enough, John, that they're going to move him to left tackle and allowed them to release Brandon Albert, who has been a pretty steady guy, injured a lot, but 32 years old. You wonder how much he has left in the tank.
Yeah, shocking that a young 20-something in our country would smoke marijuana today. But I think a lot, and I wrote about this today on FanRag Sports NFL, is that the veteran left tackle market's looking a little more beefier than expected. Well, you had Albert is going to be out there, as you mentioned, a 32-year-old guy, certainly on the downside, but he's a four-time Pro Bowler. You have Ryan Clady. The Jets didn't pick up his option. He's a former Pro Bowl player. And you have Beacham in Jacksonville. They're not picking up his option. So that's three. And they all had down seasons. And Clady's over 30 as well. So that's always a red flag. But I'll tell you, if you're the New York Giants or you're Minnesota with T.J. Clemmings or you're Seattle with George Fant, hey, those guys are worlds above that. And all of a sudden they're out there. We always talk about Band-Aids, Mike, you and I, and a lot of the success in this league, when you look back, it's about who gets the best Band-Aids every year. Because you can't fix every position with a superstar. And I think for teams like the Giants and Vikings and Seahawks, they could do a lot worse than a Brandon Albert or Ryan Clady.
Yep, no doubt. And you're right about the Band-Aid things. It's you get a team like the Giants last year who signed a bunch of guys, and a lot of those Band-Aids all hit, right? Those were guys who were – now, some of them were higher profile guys. Vernier was a guy who was a higher profile guy. But they brought in a lot of guys that they were hoping, and a lot of them hit. But you're right. You could do a lot worse than bringing in a guy like Brandon Albert to help your offensive line if you're one of the teams that you mentioned, Minnesota, Seattle, have had all sorts of issues over the years. Speaking of Minnesota, Adrian Peterson tweeted yesterday about the interesting moves the Giants have made this offseason. Does that indicate to you that Peterson has his eye on the Giants, or is he mocking the reports of people suggesting he might go there?
No, he knows what's coming down, and so he's kind of doing his own business, trying to figure out where he wants to land. And the Giants are one of those logical spots. As is, perhaps Tampa. They're going to move on from Doug Martin. Houston, always seemingly. With Eric and Foster gone, they're not thrilled with Lamar Miller. They could be looking and even Jerry Jones is bizarre. He's got Ezekiel out. He's still talking about getting Adrian Peterson. He's always wanted him because he's a Texas native, but he understands the Minnesota Vikings aren't paying him $18 million. So he's going to have to take a significant pay cut, and he's probably not willing to do that for the Vikings. So that means he's got to move on. And I think the Giants would be an interesting situation for him, as I mentioned earlier in the week. Now, the one thing that throws a little cold water on that is the fact that if you look at the way the Giants play offense, and Ben McAdoo, since he's been there, they're almost always in the shotgun. And Adrian does not like that. So they would have to completely morph their running game, but maybe they're willing to do so.
Hey, John, Vince Young is attempting to make a comeback. Will we see the guy who coined the phrase dream team back in the NFL?
I can't imagine. I mean, look, let's be honest. Vince was not very good when he was young, and it's hard to imagine.
He had a year.
Anybody taking a chance on him. He had early in his career, but he was okay. But as far as where he was drafted, what was expected to be, he's a bust. He's an NFL draft bust, and a lot of it is mechanical issues. He was sort of on the ground floor of that, the change in the college game and the shift to these wide open spread offenses where the quarterbacks come in and they don't have good mechanics and they sort of have to learn them at the NFL level. And he never really did. And I don't see that changing now, so I don't give him much of an opportunity.
John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter. And, of course, you can follow him over there and read all his national NFL coverage at FanRag Sports NFL, where the offseason underway and a lot of the moves will be happening in about 2 weeks' time. John, you also wrote about at FanRag NFL about the NFL Combine that is coming up. And one of the things you talk about how some of the players, Chad Kelly was a guy who did not get an invite of the 300-plus players there, and you think that is a counterproductive move by the NFL Combine.
Yeah, because if you think about it, they're barring guys. They created this policy last year who've had domestic violence offenses or weapons offenses, and they bar them from the Combine. But if you think about that logically, they're not barring them from the draft or the league or teams are drafting them. And the whole point of the Combine is to get the players together in one place so the teams can do their due diligence on the prospect. And for the guys with red flags, it would seem to me it would be more important to have them there so the teams can question them and do their interviews, do their due diligence, and see, is Joe Mixon worthy? Is Kelly worthy? It just doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's obviously a public relations fueled thing because they're concerned about protesters and saying, why are you letting somebody like Mixon, who was on video hitting a woman, why are you letting him in the Combine? So great, you placate them for a couple weeks, but he's going to get drafted. He's going to be in the league.
Right.
So I don't understand what they're trying to accomplish.
John McMullen has the latest on the NFL at JF McMullen. We'll have more tomorrow. And, of course, once this free agent series season opens up, it will be very interesting to see the new faces in some new
Fast
places.
And Furious.
That's right.
What it's going to be.
All right, John. Take care, pal.
All right, thanks, guys.